Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Welcome if you're new. Today, I have Crystalline Avatovich to discuss the astrology of June 2023 with me. Hi, Crystalline. Thank you for coming on.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. This is going to be awesome.
Yeah, so why don't you just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, like what kind of astrology you practice, and any other projects that you kind of have going on at the moment.
I'm very passionate about traditional astrology. I make it basically my life's breath reading traditional texts and studying them. I got started with that with my formal studies in about 2016, and I've been a practicing astrologer full time since 2020. It was a big change for a lot of us. And that one, at the end of my Saturn return, this is what Saturn seemed to be wanting from me. So I followed and it worked. And so now I am a practicing astrologer, but I also help people write fiction novels using what I call the high vibe hero's journey. It's a book structure that goes along the hero's journey, but also the healing journey that tends to happen in healing modalities and emotional recovery and processing of trauma. I'm certified in 15 different healing modalities along with astrology. So I noticed a pattern and I went for it and I help people with that. And then lastly, I actually work with CV Henriette, who is Art of the Zodiac, and we have Ask Me Astros, which is a once a month situation where we go through a chart and show you what it's like when astrologers from two very different mindsets approach a single chart and answer a question.
Oh, wow. So you definitely are versed in like helping other people out, it seems like.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
I have a Virgo.
you have a Virgo midheaven. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think 2020 was like definitely like a huge resurgence for astrology. I know that that's when I started practicing with clients as well too. It was kind of tiptoeing my way in, but that was that was towards the very tail end of my Saturn return, and that's kind of when I was like, okay, let's just do this. So, um, once again, thanks for coming on. So let's kind of just jump right into June. June
Yeah.
itself, it seems like just going into it, I feel like we're kind of coming down off of May because it seems like the May energy itself is super intense. So June, I mean, there's moments of intensity, but it's not necessarily like I wouldn't call it like a peaking moment.
Mhm. Yeah, I
So
agree.
yeah. Um, so on June 4th, we have our first transit that we're going to go over is the full moon in Sagittarius. And on that same day, we also have the Mercury in Taurus conjunct Uranus, which just adds a little bit of extra spice to it. So what are your feelings on this full moon in Sagittarius after going through kind of a mini eclipse period?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so the eclipses have been bringing us through a lot. And of course, they're in this transitional period as well. We're moving from the eclipses being in the Taurus Scorpio axis into Aries Libra. So as that, I like to say it's the middle chapters between novels. So when you're waiting for the second installment of a series and the author puts out a couple novellas to keep you going, that's kind of what these eclipses feel like. And so now that we have Mercury conjunct Uranus on the day that we also happen to have a lunation in Sagittarius, I think about Sagittarius being about, exploring the world, freedom, the mutability and the fire elements of it, and the fact that it wants to catch on something, right?
Mhm.
And at this time, we're enjoying Jupiter in Taurus as well. So drawing in that focus over to Taurus and saying, hey, maybe something new, maybe the way old things were going and maybe old ways of thinking are finally ready to expand, and current things that we've planted seeds on are ready to be investigated. I think that we might see a lot of culmination of that, this being a full moon.
Yeah, we have Jupiter is the ruling planet or the host for the moon, and
Mhm.
we have the host for the sun, Mercury, in Taurus, where we have been having eclipses. So it's kind of like bringing up the past, letting go of it. And then also too, with the lunation being in mutable signs, it's like getting ready to move on to something new when the nodes shift and we have a whole new eclipse cycle. So I can't help but like Like, and I feel like that's kind of what 2023 to me, especially the beginning part, has kind of been this waiting room where it's like we know something's gonna like shift or change, but we're kind of in that liminal space. And that's kind of how I see the mutable signs. It's like they're a little bit of both. And that's what I could kind of see with this full moon is letting go before we kind of move on to a new cycle or a new something.
Mm.
Um, yeah, Jupiter in Taurus, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have dignity, but it's a wonderful placement.
Mhm.
I know I'm excited for it for the next year or so, but um I could definitely see a lot of letting go or a lot of realization with like the mind itself.
Mhm. And I also think that we see this almost reiterated in other placements of the chart when we look at it. Saturn in Pisces seems to
Mhm.
be processing perhaps of traumas or perhaps of things that were confusing before, and now we're trying to understand them with hindsight. And I think that really harkens back to Saturn having been in domicile through all of those years of big change and a lot of really interesting conjunctions. And
Yeah.
so now Saturn's settling down and we're wading through these thoughts. And also at the same time, Pluto is just about to tip back over into Capricorn
Yeah.
and say, hey, you remember all this stuff that you've been doing since January? It's time to go back and make sure that you understand the evolution you're going through. So with Jupiter there grounding us, that's quite nice. I think that's a little lightning rod for us to be able to ground into, or
Yeah.
the dirt that you can sink your feet into,
Mhm.
as we're just kind of figuring out what have I been through and what does that mean about the way I see the world. And
Yeah.
then Mercury and Taurus saying, how do we supply for what's coming in? How
Mhm.
do we change the processes, the systems, the supply chains to make this work as we move forward?
Yeah, exactly, because that's what realistically, like if you think of the moon itself as a general archetype, it's the filter that we see the lens through. It's the filter that the planets come down through.
Mhm.
So it's like if the fact that the lunation has a very grounded host,
Mhm.
Jupiter and Taurus, kind of it brings a little bit of stability rather than because Jupiter can expand no matter what, whether it be, subjectively good or bad. Growth isn't always a good thing. You don't want cancer to grow, but you do want like your personal philosophies and your moral values to grow, things like that. So it brings a little bit of a grounding to this lunation where we're able to kind of, like you were saying, process what has been going on the past couple of years, because we're really leaving that chapter of Saturn, Capricorn, all those difficult situations behind.
Yeah.
All right. So our next transit we have is June 6th. Um, Ingress, I should say. We have Venus is moving into the sign of Leo, and Venus will be here until October 9th because she will have a retrograde period in Venus, or excuse me, in Leo. So it's an extended stay. So um, Venus is here for a while.
Yeah.
Um, you know, Venus will station at the end of July in Leo, so she's going to be realistically at the later degrees of Leo, and that's why it's such an extended stay. But once again, any planet moving into a fixed sign as of right now picks up a hard aspect to Pluto in Aquarius, and that's what Venus does. She picks up an opposition to Pluto in Aquarius.
Hmm.
Um,
She follows Mars's example
yeah,
from earlier in the month.
yeah,
Actually,
exactly.
that I think that perfects in May when they have their opposition.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and going back to May, like Mars and Pluto together can be very, very destructive, very, very controlling or manipulative.
Yeah.
But with Venus there, I think of like the uncovery of like the ugly side of what it is you want, the ugly side of love, like hard, difficult subjects in that, if you're thinking of in that archetype. Also too, with like Venus stationing retrograde in Leo, I can't help but feel like picking up a opposition to Pluto, there's going to be some sort of um, like realization or thought process around your relationship to love and how you've experienced love or relationship or social engagements in the past. And it's kind of like uncovering these hidden traumas or these dark sides of you that you realize didn't have as much influence until now.
hmm Well, and it's interesting to think that oppositions by nature are similar to the nature of a full moon, right? It's you
Mhm.
and the other person. And Venus is in Leo, wondering who she is in a relationship. And then the thing on the other side, it may not necessarily be a person, it might be past relationships and how they've, the dark side, or how they've forced Venus to become who she is today. And so it might be this looking back on just who we are because of the relationships we've been in. And it kind of prepares you for how does that affect me in relationships now, which Venus might address more when she does retrograde at the end of July. And just thinking about her running with Mars for quite some time, he
Yeah.
gets away from her when she retrogrades, and he'll move on. But they
Yeah.
did this last time too, when she retrograded in Capricorn, and they ran
Mhm.
together for a while.
Mhm.
And so this time she's chasing Mars down a little bit after his retrograde, and he's going to get away. So thinking about maybe even the one that got away and why, and
Mm.
who you are in a relationship. And the main theme that I've been kind of mulling over when I think about Venus retrograde in Leo is, how is each individual in the relationship seen and heard and understood? Are there compromises? Or, if you're not having, is it a win-win,
Yeah.
basically? Is the relationship still a win-win? And if not, how willing are you to compromise?
Yeah, exactly. It's, if we think of Venus, it's what we need to feel comfortable and what we need to feel good about ourselves.
Mhm.
And if we're not feeling good about ourselves, it's hard to feel good when you're with someone else. It's kind of that like that phrase, it's like, attitude is contagious type of thing, even though Venus doesn't rule over our emotions. But if we're physically uncomfortable or we're not happy in relationship, it's going to drag the other person down.
Mhm.
But luckily, like, Venus is moving relatively fast, so the transit itself, or the exact opposition isn't going to be felt for long, but there's still this period of, like, bringing up some very uncomfortable things. It could change friendship dynamics, relationship dynamics, what it is you value, your relationship to material possessions or wealth. Pluto is things like wealth. So I could definitely see, on a collective level, this, like, uncovering of, hidden wells or something like that, or like the corruption behind, influential people, things like
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, I think especially with Pluto still kind of in Aquarius, and I
Yeah.
say kind of just because hanging on by a thread on this one,
Mm.
um, it's really this preamble to what are we noticing in society, and
Mhm.
what do we need to go back and rework before it can actually stand on its own? Why is this a house built on sand, and
Yeah.
what do we need to do to pave that foundation?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love that. So speaking on Pluto, June 11th, right around that time period, we have Pluto moving back into Capricorn.
Mhm.
And Pluto is here until January 20th, 2024. So he's bringing back up things. It's closing the door and then opening it back up and be like, and another thing, I'm not done with you. And Pluto will stay at 29 degrees of Capricorn until July 27th. And
Mhm.
the last time Pluto was at that 29 degrees of Capricorn was February 12th to March 23rd. So if you think back during that time period, that's kind of the collective, the things that are being brought back up, for that period, or even personally for you.
Yeah, especially if Pluto was interacting with something in your chart by an opposition square or conjunction at that time, you
Yeah.
might have noticed, and it would have been pretty poignant. But I agree. Otherwise, it's something that we're looking at headlines for,
Hmm.
perhaps, and seeing what came up around that time. And just thinking back on, like, it doesn't feel like it was all that long ago. So it's just like, how far have we come just even in this year of Pluto making their way into Aquarius? And I think one of the funny things that is a kind of a combo of Pluto and Aquarius so far and Saturn and Pisces is that whole AI movement, and
Mm.
how it went from, I'm not so sure about this, the skepticism perhaps of Aquarius, but then Pisces comes in, or Saturn and Pisces is also saying, yeah, but we need to make it work. If it's going to be here, how do we use it? And I think it's been integrated and accepted very quickly. And in that, I think we're going to start seeing where we have opportunities to now say, okay, now that it's here and we're comfortable with it, what do we do with it?
Yeah.
What needs to be regulated, perhaps, with the idea of Capricorn? Um, so I'm wondering if we kind of walk back on certain different ways of using AI and things.
Yeah, exactly. Because that was right around when I know AI has been out for quite some
Mhm.
time, but not everyone has had access to it. And that's kind of right around that time period that, the AI art, the chat GPT
Mhm.
kind of became like a more mainstream thing. So it's going back to that time period. And like you were saying, the regulations or the restrictions, or like, how are we going to use this responsibly?
Mhm.
um, and not create some sort of, complete chaos around it.
Mhm.
That was also, a lot of astrologers have also been talking about Pluto in Capricorn, as far as like the beginning of Pluto through Capricorn was the financial crash, and then the very tail end was the Silicon Valley bank crash. So
Mhm.
that those themes around banking, around the structures that we kind of run our civilization under, might also be brought up as well too. It could be things around housing, because that's kind of been a common theme during this whole Pluto and Capricorn, is housing.
Mhm.
Where am I going to set my roots and my foundation down on, and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, in order to support an entire like future generation, even
Yeah,
because with Pluto, I think he might make one more pass back into Capricorn just
he does.
briefly,
Yeah.
and then he's there for until 2046. So we're doing this for a long time. And Capricorn's like, yeah, but did you pack your socks? But did you
Hmm.
pack this? Like, are you
Yeah.
sure you're ready?
Yeah, exactly. So Pluto will be back at that 29 degrees, December 20th to January 20th,
Mhm.
2024. And then again, September 2nd to November 19th, 2024. And then after that period, it's finally leaving. But in astrology, typically the 29th degree is signified as like the breakdown, the decay, the death, the destruction, because it's the last sign of that zodiac. It's the last degree of that zodiac sign. So it's finishing up, what has been happening in order to move on to something new.
Mhm.
So we're kind of leaving that time period down, or leaving that time period behind us, and we're finalizing it, and it's coming to a close, but it's going to be a slow close because it's Pluto.
Because it's Pluto and because Pluto happens to be able to retrograde over that cusp so many times,
Hmm.
we really are checking all the boxes before we commit to something, which
Yeah.
is not what I would normally associate with something Pluto does. But since it is such a generational planet or a long period of time, it does seem like there's something that we will be dwelling on that sticks with us for a while.
Hmm. It's also interesting too to think about. I've been thinking about like the Pluto generations, and it's like we think of
Mhm.
during this time period, the Pluto and Cancer generation is really the ones that are coming to completion and closing, and they're the ones that are dying out. So I
Mhm.
almost think of like it's this one last chance to kind of inherit and collect the knowledge that that generation has had before it completely is gone forever, you know? And that's kind of what's going to be happening as well too with the Pluto and Aquarius. It's like this is our opportunity to learn from our elders and kind of gain this wealth of knowledge that not everyone, it's not always going to be written down or anything like that. So I think of carrying on traditions just as like a generational theme for
Absolutely.
Pluto itself.
Yeah. And thinking about that generation of people and the wisdom that they have, we really shouldn't be forgetting.
Yeah.
And you can see in society these days, there is the question of whether or not we are. So I think that's a really important point that you're making.
Yeah, exactly. I find the oppositions for Pluto with generations just completely fascinating, because
Mhm.
Pluto and Aquarius, I can kind of see already the destruction of the Pluto and Leo generation, where it's like the built up, the nuclear family and the suburban housewife, and it's all kind of coming to a crumble, or like family vacations and fast food and diners and drive-ins and stuff like that. And it's all kind of like we're flipping back to like a more traditional way.
Yeah, I love that mindset.
So on June 11th as well too, we have Mercury moving into Gemini. This is one of Mercury's home signs or domicile. It's going to be here until June 26th, so it's relatively fast. Mercury's moving fast in the sky. He's getting ready to conjoin the sun again, and kind of reset the cycle, which is exciting. So as of right now, Mercury is a morning star. What I mean by that is if you go outside in the morning before the sun rises, you'll see Mercury on the eastern horizon. So Mercury itself takes on a more masculine quality when a planet is morning star. Getting your point across, things are a little bit more objective than subjective, things like that. So, and Mercury itself doesn't have any sort of, it's like gender fluid. It doesn't, take on masculine or feminine. So, it doesn't really affect it in that way. But yeah, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, Mercury will disappear around June 18th. So we have a little bit of a window to kind of see Mercury before he disappears. Unfortunately, I never get up early enough to see the planets. I look at them at night, and then in the morning I'm like, yeah, I'll look and see these ones, and I never do. So what's your thoughts or feelings on Mercury moving into Gemini?
I think Mercury in Gemini is going to be really great. I know Mercury is both exalted and has domicile in Virgo, but
Mhm.
because of the earthiness of Virgo, it's more of like Mercury getting their affairs in order and getting everything organized, which as a Virgo midheaven, I can appreciate. But there's something that's just freeing about Mercury being in Gemini, especially since the opportunity here Mercury gets all the time is to be in chariot in
Mm,
Gemini
yeah.
and visible at the same time. So this is a really good time for Mercury. And I think, as an astrological magician, I'll be looking for writers, my clients who are often writers with the storytelling program I do. If I can, I'll make them some Mercury talismans so
Mhm.
that it's something to support their writing. But it's a really great time to be thinking, to be pondering, to be maybe even exploring things. And I think Mercury being so fast at it, we may find that we have a pileup of things that we want to get to, that once Mercury does slow down, we'll be able to kind of get through that process and that pile of to-dos at that point.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I've always thought of Mercury and Gemini as a little bit more chaotic than
Mhm.
Mercury and Virgo. So it's like that image of like so many ideas or so much work or so many tasks coming your way that they're piling up. And then once Mercury slows down, you're able to kind of check those off your list type of thing. So I love that. It gives people a little bit of hope because Mercury and Gemini can feel very fast, especially as a morning star, especially like the planet itself moving fast. So it gives you a little bit of reprieve knowing that like the chaos isn't going to last forever and you'll have an opportunity to kind of deal with what's on your plate.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that it's also reminiscent of the feeling that we had with every planet moving forward from middle of January through Mercury's retrograde in April, starting on the 21st. It was like this train moving full speed ahead and everything was happening. And I remember myself, I'm thinking, I actually can't wait for Mercury retrograde because this is a lot and I need the time and I need the space to be able to like process through it and get some stuff done. And so, Mercury moving fast, visible, in domicile, in chariot, in an air sign, morning star, there's just a lot of go, go, go
Yeah.
happening energy.
Yeah, exactly. Like I remember that too. As soon as Mercury, when it was in Taurus, reached its maximum elongation and began to kind of slow down, that's when I was like really felt motivated to get things done. And I felt like I could kind of like, I'm like, okay, like things are a little bit less fast moving in life in general, so that I can kind of deal with the tasks at hand, type of thing. But yeah, so for this time period until June 26th, realistically, it's gonna feel like there's a lot of information coming at you. I always think of Mercury and Gemini as like the Twitter version of things. So there might be a lot of new information coming your way, especially with Mercury moving towards the sun. There may be a lot of illumination or realization about things, or the mind might just feel like it's on fire and active. But after that conjunction, which I don't have written down in my notes right now, but after the conjunction with the sun, there'll be some sort of clarity or some sort of mental resets as well too, which will be nice.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting to think about the information that comes out, maybe information that eventually, because we think about Mercury carrying this information into the fires of the sun.
Hmm.
So before we have the conjunction, which is nice clarity and things are going to get maybe a little dramatic. So we get the information, it's moving really quickly, people are reacting to it, and then all of a sudden if you think about Mercury and the visibility of it, we don't have the direct access anymore. So it almost feels
Yeah.
like we want answers, we can't get them.
Hmm.
Perhaps around the Cazimi, we get some answers, but then we have to go through the actual work of applying what we've now learned as Mercury rises in the evening.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. So let's move on to the next one. June 13th, we have the Venus in Leo square Jupiter in Taurus. Um, so, Venus and Jupiter together, like it's a good time, but sometimes a good time is too much, and that's what this can kind of feel like. It's like I think of I think of when Venus and Jupiter are in hard aspect to each other, square or opposition. I think of like not knowing when the party's over type of thing, like overdoing it. Um,
Yeah.
Especially in these two signs, it's like, Jupiter's in a Venus ruled sign. Venus is in the sun sign Leo, which can kind of be like outshining and over the top a little bit to itself.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be one of those days where like overindulging is too easy to access.
Yeah, especially with on that day, the moon is applying to conjoin with Jupiter and Taurus as well. So the moon's really feeling it. Venus is ruling both of them, making it a little bit of a, what did I want today? And
Mhm.
so you end up really just saying yes to all the things that you could possibly want. There might be overspending that goes on.
Yeah.
There might be overindulgence in perhaps food or something like that that happens around this time. And it's something that we'll have to think about later.
Yeah.
But I think that this gives you the like green light when maybe it should have been a yield.
Yeah, exactly. And with that moon coming to apply Jupiter, the moon in Taurus is exalted, which means it's
Mhm.
put up high. If
Yep.
we need to think that like the higher up you are, the harder it is going to be when you fall. So like don't climb too high with your indulgences or what it is like you say or what it is you do. Mars is close to these planets.
Mhm.
Venus is moving closer, so it's like Mars might just kind of add fuel to that fire and make it so that you don't think of the consequences of your actions almost.
Mhm. Yeah.
But luckily around this day as well, we have Saturn in Pisces is making a sextile to Jupiter, so it's not necessarily grounding, but it could be like like a mediator, kind of like an outside mediator being like, okay, well, I'm going to be the voice of reason a little bit, and let's think things through before we kind of rush into something.
Mhm. Yeah, maybe Saturn is the text you end up getting that says, "Hey, your budget's getting a little bit low. Be careful with your spending."
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, the wise mage coming to like be the voice of reason
Mhm.
in that sense. Or even just like I think of, Saturn in Pisces itself. I think of just like having deep um feelings of responsibility for moral conviction. So it could be like someone could be like, "Hey, you want to like go do ecstasy?" And you're like, "Yeah, totally." And then you're like, "Wait, but like I don't do drugs and I don't think that that's the right thing to do." So like, Saturn's being like, "Okay, I'm going to stick to like a moral, virtuous path type of
Mhm.
things rather than like I'm here for a good time, not a long time type of thing."
Yeah, it kind of makes me think that Saturn's still going out with the friends and having a good time, but is the designated driver.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. You do have the desert. Yeah, I love that. That's great. I think that's like a perfect analogy as Saturn is the designated driver in the situation. Um, so that's like realistically like June 13th. Just be mindful with, just be mindful with how you kind of want to have fun or a good time or indulge, things like that. Like indulgence is fine, but I'm expecting in our town because my husband's a volunteer firefighter. I'm expecting that day to kind of ramp up where people are kind of partying too much. It's warm out. They make stupid decisions, things like that. So, all All right, next transit we have is we have June 17th. We have Saturn stations retrograde in Pisces around this day, give or take. So, but realistically, Saturn hasn't been moving at all really in June. It's very slow. It takes a long time to stop. So Saturn significations might be a little harder to access or be delivered to you. It might be slower, or it might feel like there's just no open lines of communication in that way.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's also it happens to be around the new moon as well. So we're thinking about Saturn stopping at the beginning of a cycle in Gemini with Mercury right there. Saturn, of course, is supported or answering to Jupiter at this point as well. And we still have that square separating now by about 6 degrees almost, but it's something to keep in mind as we're looking at like what could begin with this new moon that is really going to have sort of a pressure on it that says, this is something that needs to start, but it needs to respect something that came before or something of that nature.
Yeah, exactly. Find those, with Saturn in a water sign, it might be hard to find the boundaries, because it's like if you think of water, it's just kind of it flows where it goes, and like it forms to its container. So I think of Saturn and Pisces itself as like teaching us how to find the boundaries or the limitations in situations that it's not always a clear cut line drawn. And like you were saying, with that new cycle setting over in Gemini, it's like I think of like really thinking before you speak, or thinking of the moral impact of what it is you're learning, or what it is you're teaching, or what it is you're saying that are going to have on others as well too. Sometimes the best thing to do is not say something at all.
Yeah, especially in whole sign, Saturn is squaring
Mhm.
Gemini as well. So it is this like maybe write it out first before you go saying it so that you can process it, or maybe have someone proofread what you're
Mhm.
planning on sending, or just don't send the text right away kind of messaging.
Yeah.
Where you do just take a minute and think it through, give yourself an outline to whatever it is that you're creating at this point, or a
Yeah.
path forward.
Yeah, exactly. And with the, Mercury itself is moving, it's just about disappeared. So we also have to remember that like the Mercury significations of communication, writing, things like that might not be as easily accessible around this time. So it's, slowing down to take your time, even though things are moving fast, like we were saying before. Um, which might be hard in an air sign, new moon.
Yeah, and I also wonder about certain things being again with this integrated, but we're also coming into like what is going to be written that is going to stay.
Yeah.
And so this looks like perhaps there's some new laws that might come into effect around this time, or something that is a very firm boundary, like you said, coming into effect. And, this is something that we now have to get used to and work with, for
Mhm.
better or for worse. I mean, there are some laws that aren't as restricting, and there are some things that are improved when they're given boundaries.
Mhm.
So it'll be interesting to see if that comes into play.
Yeah, I wonder. I haven't really been following the Twitter thing, like the Twitter trial, or not the Twitter trial, excuse me, the TikTok trial, the
Yeah.
bans. Like, I haven't really been following a lot about that, but I can't help but think that maybe around this time period, something around social media comes out. It could be something as simple as like Instagram changes their
Algorithm.
rules and regulations, and like not everyone notices because it's in the sign of Gemini with Mercury there. Things around tech, something like that, or things around um, you know uh tech censorship with speech, or something like that.
Yeah, I think I have been following it because it is one of my primary platforms,
Mhm.
and it's been interesting to intuitively feel out how it's going, because it does already. It gets this like burst of attention, and then it'll get subtle again, and then it gets a burst. So it feels
Yeah.
very much like this kind of
Mercury.
energy saying, "Hey, we're here, but
Mhm.
will you see us when we move?
Mm. Yeah,
That's gonna be an interesting thing to keep an eye on.
yeah, exactly. And then we kind of already like touched on this, but like the next day after after Saturn stations, realistically,
Mhm.
we have that new moon in Gemini, and it's going to be squaring Neptune and Pisces. So like there's this already like not like what is fact and what is fiction. I think that there's going to be a lot of confusion around, you know, news or like information, stuff like that. I mean, I know that I already have such a hard time discerning what is true and what is not. Um, but I also have a Mercury square Neptune natally, with Saturn there. But I could see this time period around this new moon. It's like, you know, I'm not saying like false information coming out, but a lot of people being confusing as to what to trust as truth or fact, or discerning against, you know, fiction and nonfiction, things like that.
Yeah, and so much of information has gone from being data to I want to say I don't want to say personality traits, but it's
Mm,
helping people define who they believe they are.
yeah.
So that makes it very hard to change your mind. And one of the things I noticed was with the solar eclipse in Aries, you look at, who are the kings? So who's being affected? And what does that say about who the kings are in society right now?
Hmm.
And a lot of the results of the events that happened around that eclipse were based on news, information access, the people who influence those areas. So we are noticing that information is the thing that people are looking up to or looking for and seeking the most. It's almost like a commodity in and of itself
Hmm.
as to the quality of it. Kind of like, are you looking at a diamond or are you looking at it's not iron
Cubic
pyrite, that's
zirconia.
gold. Yeah,
Yeah.
cubic zirconia.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that that's going to be something that perhaps there's an impasse because there is so little motion at this time. There's an impasse because there's not enough information gathered.
Yeah. And I think of, you know, I really see this time period as like, there's kind of this crumbling or collapsing of, um, what has been considered news outlets or how people get their news. The fact that print newspapers, like no one's buying them and they're, you know, subscribing online, or they're going to alternate news sources rather than like NBC and CNN and Fox. You know, there's so many different news outlets to choose from now. And I could see that this is kind of like this moment of a lot of people being like, okay, I don't need to follow, um, you know, what someone is saying just because they're on TV. I can, you know, access news other places as well too.
Mhm.
um but it's just a very fascinating like lunation itself with Neptune involved.
Mhm.
I can see like I could even just see people being super confused as to what it is that they want to like, what direction they want to go in life. You know, if you have any sort of mutable placements where there might be like a crisis of consciousness, it's like, do I really want to do this with my life type of thing?
Mhm.
Especially if your son's in a mutable place, uh, in that sense.
Yeah, it's a kind of trying to figure out where what side of the coin it's going to land on.
Mm.
And it almost feels like in a situation like this, you would just do a coin toss to make a decision because you want to make a decision, but you don't have the confidence to do it because there is so many sources of information coming at you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I like it, like you were touching on before. I also like I also think of like people really starting to like, with that Saturn energy and Pisces, people really starting to step back and being like, am I defining my personality on like what it is that like the information that's being fed to me through the algorithm, or do I need to kind of like give that a little bit of a break and like experience life in real life type of thing?
Yeah. In gaming, we call that, do I need to go touch grass?
Yeah, exactly. It's like sometimes the algorithm takes you over too much, and that might be one of these periods where it's like people are really realizing how catered social media is to the things that they spend their attention on.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the thing that I've noticed recently with the whole situation around social media that's going on is it's become social media where it used to be social networking.
Yeah, yeah,
There's a totally different vibe to that. Mercury would say, hey, this should be social networking. We should be connecting.
yeah.
But perhaps, the confusion is you're confusing social media with social networking.
Mm.
To social media, you are a consumer. In networking, you're a potential friend.
Yeah,
And there's a
exactly.
totally different role going on there.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. That is so true because it's like every other thing on social media is an ad to consume something.
Yep. Yeah, I remember the days of TikTok where there weren't ads yet, and now it's every third thing
Yeah.
because it happens to be an ad.
Well, and it's super overwhelming too. It's like I go on TikTok and it's like there's so many posts and like you feel like you don't know, I you can't keep up with it all. There's too much flying at you at once.
You'll never
So,
hit the bottom, that's for sure.
no, exactly. Yeah, it's exactly like TikTok. You'll never hit the bottom. So that this new moon might be like redefining relationship to, technology, social media, things like that, like realizing that Neptune, there is no bottom, you know?
Yep.
So the next ingress we have is June 21st. We have the sun into Cancer and until about July 22nd, depending on time zone, things like this. Around this time as well, we have Venus begins to reach her maximum elongation from the sun, which means her furthest distance from the sun. So she's moving fast, but after she reaches that like distance shores from the sun, she begins to kind of slow down a little bit. So this is a time where we were kind of touching on that Venus first moving into Leo, where things kind of start to slow down or things kind of start to be like, okay, the past is starting to come up because this is realistically where Venus will have her, some people call it pre-shadow, foreshadow, I don't know. But the maximum elongation is what I'm trying to say is typically the pre-shadow retrograde period.
Yep. Yeah, this is the point where she's kind of done covering the degrees the first time, or she's entered the degrees that she's going to recover. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah,
So she's
exactly.
going to be we're coming back this way sometime soon.
Yeah, exactly. And on this day too, we have the moon tangled in with Venus and Mars as well. So it might be somewhat of a like an intense day is what I'm saying. Like kids might have a lot of flare-ups emotionally or just be needy. That's what I've kind of noticed is if there's like major transits happening and the moon is involved, it's like kids are just a little bit more high energy, high intense, needier or more emotional.
Yeah, definitely becomes a lot more personal when the moon gets involved. And the moon, even at this point, is just about at a crescent phase too. So we're whatever was initiated during that new moon, we're starting to get little hints about it now.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's going to happen, hinting at it with Venus getting ready to say, yeah, we're going to come back to that. Don't worry. Like this is the passive aggressive Venus setting you up for the argument later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And with that sun just moving into Cancer, it's just like the overall story seems very personal or like you can kind of relate to it as well. That's what I've kind of noticed with like a sun in Cancer as far as transits or mundane. It's like the story kind of hits close to home type of thing.
Yeah.
In that sense. So that's kind of what I have to say about the sun in Cancer. I mean, I could go on and on about it and harp on it, but
yeah, I think we're also in for perhaps like a month and a summer even, because this is the initiation of the summer season at the same time. This is the
yeah.
solstice. And so when you think about that even in ancient mundane astrology, we look at this chart to say, how's the season going to go? And with that moon conjunct Venus at a crescent phase, the sun in Cancer, we're coming into like perhaps a new awareness of our own nostalgia. Thinking about the sun in Cancer, thinking about Venus being involved, it's who am I in this lineage that I come from? And that's an interesting thing that may come up. We see that on a societal level about different cultures that you come from and awarenesses of that. So that might be another thing that people really investigate as the month continues.
Yeah, and I just realized too, we have like the summer solstice, it's when the sun is at its highest point on the ecliptic, and we have Venus at her furthest elongation. So there's this sense of like we've reached our pinnacle and now it's time to start coming down because that's what the sun does. It reaches its highest point on the ecliptic and then it slowly starts descending down further till its lowest point at the winter solstice. So it's like I see this time period as like a very peaking moment as far as like the story that's being told. in the mundane sense. And once again, it could be very personal, or it could be associated with relationships, social acquaintances, like your values, your possessions, things like that. All right, so our next transit we have, we're moving right along. We're at the end of June already, June 26th. We have Mars and Leo square Uranus and Taurus. This is a relatively explosive one. Some general significations can be like accidents because you're rushing, avoidable accidents if you were a little bit more cautious. I think of doing too many things at once and like just scattering your energy in that sense. And we also have Venus tied in very closely as well too.
Yeah, this gives me the idea of Mars being so hasty that maybe we use more resources than we had available.
Mm.
And so, in the Venus tie-in of not thinking about other people who were affected. So like you're eating the last 3 brownies in the fridge when someone else could have had one.
Yeah.
And it's because you just had this random hankering. And so you went for it, but then it's like, oh, dang, I should have paced myself just a little bit and thought maybe one step ahead. And I'm not sure that Mars is gonna be too keen on actually pausing enough to do that. I still feel like Mars is like home free and running as fast as Mars can
Yeah.
after grade and after getting out of Cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I see this as like a very excited Mars off to the races,
Mm-hmm.
and Venus is coming up. Probably she's close now, closer than she's been, and probably will maintain
Mm-hmm.
before he takes off away from her. But it's interesting to think of who took the last cookie that someone else was, or who ate the lunch at work that had someone else's name on it.
Yeah, exactly. I think of I'll glad you pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. It's like,
Yes.
like robbing, like you're not thinking of the future, and but it's like, will you have money for a hamburger on Tuesday, or are
Mhm.
your bills due that day and like you have to pay those instead? So, like you were saying, it's like Mars is like finally out of retrograde from Gemini, and then it gets into Cancer, which it's not relatively comfortable moving through. So now Mars and Leo is just like it's here for a good time, and it's here to like set some fires. It's Leo itself, I think of like one of the hottest signs. I think of, Aries is very close, but the fact that Leo's ruled by the sun, which is the sun is literally a burning ball of flames in the sky. It's very hot. So, take your time on this day. It's the summer, so people are going to be feeling themselves. They're going to want to be going out and having a good time if you're in the northern hemisphere after a long winter. Um, you know, it could be even just physically hot where
Mhm.
you're doing too much and you're not taking those breaks.
Yeah. Or you're out there and you didn't realize it, but you got a really bad sunburn.
Hmm. Exactly, exactly. But with that Uranus energy, it could be very unpredictable. It could be things like forest fires because of irresponsibility. It could be things like, um, you know, not necessarily earthquakes, but some sort of like effect on the environment around you, or effect on the earth with Taurus and an earth sign as well. Um, you know, Another analogy is like burning the candle at both ends.
Yeah.
Like pick a side, just
Yeah.
pick a side and burn it.
Yeah, it's the firecracker that goes off when you thought it wasn't gonna, and then you
Hmm.
just approached it, and then it decides to. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a loose cannon around this day, give or take a couple days on either side. Um, so just be mindful. Like it's, you're gonna want to rush. You're gonna want to like, do a lot, but it might be best to kind of, once again, not overcommit.
Mhm. And if you feel like you have to vent some frustrations, give yourself a healthy outlet because the
Mm.
energy is there. It's an abundance of that chaotic energy. This is a great day to take up, kickboxing or going somewhere to the gym or something, making sure you don't have accidents there. Obviously, wear your helmet if you're going to go biking and take safety precautions. But if you can consciously give yourself an outlet for all of that energy of wanting to burst, it might help.
Yeah, exactly. I think of like on a personal level, I think of like an analogy was I randomly, excuse me, my throat. I randomly decided to, and I've done this before, I've taken hot yoga before, but I randomly, like, just out of the blue, I'm like, I'm going to take a hot yoga class. And I did. And like, I didn't think about it and I just did it. But it was like so good because it was a healthy outlet for a lot of built up energy. And I was just like covered in sweat and drenched and I was hot. And it
Mhm.
was so like the class itself was not structured the way I was used to it. So it was unexpected. So think of that. It's like, once again, those healthy outlets to kind of release that built up tension because because Uranus can kind of like burst the bubble in a unpredictable way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really great opportunity to think about mitigation factors. And if you have the energy on the menu of surprise and fire, what's a surprise and fire you can choose rather than one that chooses you?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And just I think of like just being careful with driving and stuff. I think a lot
Mhm.
of people
Yeah.
like road rage and accidents and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So the next transit we have June 27th, we have Mercury moving into the sign of Cancer, very close to the sun at this point.
Mhm.
Um, and it's in Cancer until July 10th. So once again, Mercury's moving very fast. So we only have a couple of weeks of Mercury in a zodiac sign. But this is the period where Mercury really starts to enter the chamber, as I call it, of the sun. So it's like its outer layer is burnt. It's getting to the core of its burntness, and then soon it's like kind of sit upon the lap of the god of the sky, the sun, if you want to consider it that way. But you may notice that communication takes on a much more remembrance way, like you're remembering stuff. You kind of want to be close to home, things like that. Mercury's things like travel, so you might just want to be home close by. I also think of like just a more emotional connection with what it is you're saying and what it is you're feeling.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I love your analogy of Mercury moving into the crucible, so to speak. And you think about it as a process of refinement. If you have something that's raw, but there's a precious metal on the inside, you have to first burn away the outer layers and the things that are not pure. And as you get closer and closer to the source of the heat, you get the refinement. And then when you sit on the throne, as you said, that's when the purest metal is there. And then it gets to be molded into what comes next. It gets to be created into a sword or into a chalice or whatever comes after that when Mercury has their rise. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see perhaps how we refine the way that we connect with family,
Mhm.
parents, ancestry at this time. If certain things in nostalgia come up and we get curious about them and it becomes part of who we are and we really accept new pieces of that into us to that point of clarity when the Kazemi occurs a couple days later.
Yeah, and what I've been noticing as a theme for Cancer in general as the archetype is there's a big sense of community. So it's not necessarily just like your family. Like
Mm-hmm.
whenever there's a very prominent time in Cancer season, like there's always this sense of like community buildup. So it might be like you notice that there's some sort of heartwarming news article about community, or you're getting involved with your community and making some sort of connection with the community, something along those lines. Because if we think of it, the moon has her joy in the third house, which is the community.
Mm-hmm.
So there's kind of a correlation to that. I notice that Cancer season, it's always about community for me. And like I'm out at, barbecues and gatherings and farmers markets and things like that right around Cancer season.
Yeah, and it's helpful to remember, Cancer, it's not the first thing I think of when I think about the energy of Cancer. It's water, and we know that. So there's
Yeah.
the emotional connection and the nurturing, but it's a cardinal sign. It
Mhm.
wants to be involved, it wants to initiate things, it wants to get things moving and feel like it's a part of something. And
Mhm.
Cancer, in that way, is a nurturer, but it also wants to be needed. It wants that feeling of having a function that provides nurturing to other people. So it's sort of this reciprocal situation. I have a lot of people with Cancer suns and Cancer placements in my life, and I've been able to observe this in them, my own mother included. And it's just, as an example, she literally organizes the entire city all the time. Like
Yeah.
that's what she does. She's like, we're going to make this place better, and I'm going to show you how, and I'm going to set you up for success, and then I'm going to move on to the next person who needs me. It's a very Mary Poppins kind of energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or Nanny McPhee, perhaps. And
Hmm.
so this, we're seeing Mercury, even as a planet, tends to represent children at the same time.
Yeah.
So think about the community, and again with that kind of lineage of it's almost like a maiden mother crone kind of thing of like, where are you in this archetype of phase of life?
Yeah.
And who are the people around you that are family, found family, community, whatever it is that supports and nurtures you? Where's the village that you
Yeah.
find your
Exactly. And I think that a lot of people don't like fully understand like the cardinal aspect of Cancer, where it's like the initiation.
Mhm.
Um, and the fact that it's a water sign and water pools together, it collects, it
Mhm.
gathers. So there's this sense of like wanting to initiate gatherings. And that's funny because I mean, summertime in the northern hemisphere, what do you want to do? You want to go to barbecues at your neighbor's house and like hang out and like eat cased meats and stuff, you know?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I love that. And it's also fourth, right around 4th of July. So
Mhm.
what is America doing? They're celebrating and gathering together.
Yep. Yeah, that's perfect.
So our next one, we have June 30th, which is the last day. And this is when Mercury is at exact cazimi or conjunction with the sun. So it's that resetting moment of Mercury. The cycle has completed. It's ready to move on to a new cycle.
Mhm.
So did I write down? Yeah, Mercury's cycle began around May 1st with the excuse me, during the conjunction with the sun around Taurus season. So it's kind of like a continuation, or excuse me, the halfway point was May
Mhm.
1st. So it's kind of like a continuation of what was happening there, but also a finishing up of that time period.
Yeah. And I like to like dip into the mythology around these at sometimes. And you think about the relationship between Mercury and the sun beginning anew at this time, which would be like when Mercury or Hermes first met Apollo.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the best introduction, but they ended up they had this understanding of each other. And Mercury also, the relationship Mercury has with heroes,
Hmm.
which is another solar archetype, and how Mercury was the one who would guide heroes to Elysium,
Yeah.
in that thing, and thinking about the possibilities of nostalgia, grandeur. But also one of the things that I think, especially with this happening in Cancer, is birth announcements.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how might there be an announcement of something new or someone new, or I wonder if we're going to have a lot, like, if check your news feed around this time
Yeah.
and if there's a bunch of posts saying that they're welcoming a new member to whatever way that they give an analogy. I saw one just yesterday that had like Doctor Who theme to it, which I
Mm.
can appreciate.
That's
So
funny because I know two people right now that are pregnant and they're due right around this time period. That's great. Yeah, birth announcements. If you think of Mercury as like that child energy as well
Mhm.
too.
Yeah.
Um, coming out from the darkness into the light of day, which is what birth is.
Yeah. Yeah. Or family related or community related announcements in general might be there, but it was just a
Yeah.
really funny thing that came up in my head when I was looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, that realistically, I could see announcements around community, announcements around birth. That's like, I didn't even think of it that way, but it makes complete sense. Like maybe leaving some sort of past memory in the past so that you can move on. Because if we think Mercury is starting a new cycle, it's getting ready to reset, getting ready to reemerge. So it's Cancer dealing with the past in
Mhm.
order to kind of move into the future type of thing.
Yeah.
And what you were saying, I meant to say this earlier too. You were saying with like alchemy, the creating gold.
Hmm.
So like that's the stages of alchemy. It's like you start off with certain metals and the final product is gold. And what does the sun rule? It rules
Exactly.
gold in the heart. And that's where the most gold is found in our body, is inside of our heart. So I
Mhm.
think of, Mercury being the alchemist,
Mhm.
finally being able to create that gold, that final stage of what it has been trying to manifest.
Yeah. And in traditional astrology, Mercury did represent the diviners and the
Mhm.
astrologers and the mathematicians of the time.
Yeah.
Uh, in their ways. And I think that that's something that I don't want to lose sight of as we move into a more modern world.
Mhm.
There are still ways of alchemy, and there are still the astrologers. We're still here, and we're still finding ways to make magic and refine things and turn something into something new.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that resurgence of Hellenistic or traditional astrology. It's like we're living embodiments of the past, but in some sort of new vessel. And you know, Mercury itself, I wouldn't be surprised if around this time, like something around ancient texts come out, possibly on astrology, or something about like a realization about family for you, maybe some sort of message around family about the past, and your ancestors come up around this time on a more personal level, or just a realization as well too, with any sort of topic around that.
Yeah, it's funny for astrologers out there. This is also the Saturn return of Project Hindsight when
Oh
the
yeah.
texts were first really translated from
Mhm.
Greek. And I don't know if it's in honor of that or not, but I felt compelled recently. I'm learning ancient Greek
Mhm.
to hopefully the goal contribute to the further translation of texts as they become discovered or as we need to refine what was translated before, or as we have, more cultural understanding in a text, which also really goes with the idea of Mercury Cazimi in Cancer, really bringing out the message of a text from a long time ago and understanding it in a relevant way.
Yeah, bringing out the foundation of what we're practicing today. That's so fascinating. I went to a random bookstore, a used bookstore, and there was a book on astronomy, but it was written in Greek. And I almost bought it. It was from like probably like the 1900s. And I'm like, oh, I should have bought it. And now I'm like kicking myself because I didn't. But anyways, that just made me think of that side note. Um, so yeah, that's what we have for June. I mean, it's not like a saucy, spicy month. I mean, things are happening. Like the lunations themselves are somewhat calm. Um, they're not like over the top like some have been. So that's nice.
Yeah,
Um,
it's strange since 2020 to have a month where it's like, yeah, it's astrology this month. It's not like, oh my gosh, there's a big, transpersonal conjunction or anything like that happening, or the massive squares between personal and transpersonal planets and socials and just everybody talking to each other all the time.
yeah, and I think that that's kind of that theme with that energy in the middle of the month peaking of like overindulgence with Jupiter and Venus. It's like you might feel too relaxed that like you're like, oh yeah, I can totally do that because I'm relaxed and I'm not stressed out and I'm just gonna go have fun because everything kind of seems good at the moment.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm
but
also thinking now about how Saturn is near and like kind of applying to, not really, I'm wrong on that one, but Saturn is trine the Cazimi from 7 degrees in Pisces. And it's just like someone giving you a hangover remedy the next morning
mm, yeah, yeah,
after all
exactly.
the things that you've had. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love that. So that's what I have for June.
Mhm.
Thanks for coming on. I really enjoyed it. It was a
Me too.
lovely conversation. I always enjoy having someone that like speaks traditional astrology. I hope that everyone was able to follow along. If you weren't, message me and I can kind of explain anything that you want. But Crystalline, thank you once again for coming on. And if you're interested in her practice, you can I have all her links in the show notes and website, Instagram, things like that. So thank you all for watching and listening, and I will see you later. Bye.